She was tied, spread open under the blazing Kansas sun, and she was screaming without making a sound. The kind of scream your mind makes when your throat is already gone. May Turner was just 19, barefoot, dirty, half-conscious. Her wrists pulled straight over her head and her ankles tied so far apart the ropes cut into her skin. And she was left there like cattle, left to burn until she broke. Most folks in Dodge City would have ridden right past her that day. The prairie is wide and cruel, and people mind their own business. But if you had been there, you would have seen her eyes first. Wide, glassy, terrified, like she had already accepted she would die out there. The wind kept kicking dust across her face. She could not even wipe her own tears. Her voice was raw. She kept whispering, "Please," but no one was listening. You ever see somebody so lost that your chest tightens before your mind catches up? That was May. Left in the heat by the only man who should have protected her, her stepfather, Silas. A cruel man who drank more than he worked and believed a girl had only one purpose. After her mother died, he decided May would replace her. When she refused, he dragged her out to the far edge of his land and tied her to a fence post like this. He told her she would learn her place before sunset. Hours passed. The world shimmered like boiling water. Her throat dried to dust. Her legs shook so hard the ropes rattled. She thought she heard buzzards circling, but she was too weak to lift her head. Then something changed. The ground started to thump. Slow at first, then closer. A single horse, dust rising behind it. The rider pulled up hard when he saw Elias Ward, 47 years old, a rancher who had seen drought, death, and every kind of trouble the West could throw at a man, but nothing prepared him for the sight of a girl tied out like bait under the open sky. He froze in the saddle, not out of fear, out of disbelief. He climbed down slow, boots sinking into dry grass. May tried to speak, but only air came out. Elias knelt beside her. His shadow finally gave her a little shade. He touched the rope at her wrist. It was soaked with her sweat and blood. He looked around the empty prairie, almost expecting a monster to crawl out of the grass. Then he said 5 quiet words, words she never forgot. No one deserves this. He reached for his knife. But the moment he cut her free would be the moment her whole life changed, for better or for worse. And here's the question I need you to think about before we go any further. If you were that rancher, standing in that heat, looking at that girl, what choice would you make? Would you ride away or step into the kind of trouble most men never survive? When Elias cut the last rope, May nearly fell forward. He caught her before she hit the dirt. Her body felt light, almost hollow, like fear had carved half of her away. He lifted her onto his horse with the kind of care a man uses when he holds something he cannot fix but refuses to drop. The ride back to Ward Ranch felt slow and heavy. The prairie stretched forever, hot and quiet, except for May's shaky breaths. Elias kept talking to her in a calm voice, not asking questions. Just simple things like, "You are all right," and "Stay awake if you can." Most men out here talk rough, talk loud, but Elias spoke like he did not want to scare a wounded animal. And right then, that is exactly how May felt. Ward Ranch sat near the Arkansas River, a small place still standing, mostly because Elias worked harder than his age allowed. When he carried May inside, the old housekeeper, Mrs. Grady, took one look and nearly dropped her kettle. She pointed at the spare room and said, "Lord have mercy, put that child down before she melts." May was barely conscious. Her lips cracked, her shirt soaked with sweat and dirt. She looked like someone who had been punished for simply breathing. Mrs. Grady cleaned her wounds bit by bit, while Elias brought water and fresh cloth. He stayed near the doorway, hands on his belt, not wanting to crowd her. Most men would have stared. He did not. He kept his eyes low, like he was waiting for permission just to help. When May finally woke, the sun was slipping behind the barn outside the window. For a moment, she panicked, thought she was still tied out in that field. Then she saw Elias sitting on a chair near her bed. He had dozed off, hat tilted over his eyes. He looked older without all the ranch grit on his face, almost gentle. She whispered a single question. "Why did you help me?" Elias woke and rubbed his eyes. He looked at her for a long moment. His voice came out steady. "Because someone should have helped you a long time ago." May tried to sit up, but her ribs ached. Elias stepped closer, moving slow so she would not flinch. He helped her lean back against the pillows and set a glass of water in her hands. She drank like she had not tasted water in days. Maybe she had not. That night she woke up trembling, heart racing, certain she heard Silas's boots in the hallway. Elias was sitting outside her door, hat in his lap, keeping watch. He did not go inside. He just said in a low, calm voice that she was safe and he would stay right there until morning. She cried quietly for a long while before sleep finally found her again. Something strange happened then, a tiny spark of hope. Not enough to trust him yet, but enough to breathe without shaking. Still, she knew her stepfather Silas was not finished. A man like him never lets go that easy. And here's the real trouble brewing. What do you think Silas did next once he realized May was no longer where he left her? Silas Turner did not take long to figure out May was gone. A man like him always thinks the world owes him something. When he rode back to that field and found nothing but the cut ropes and her footprints in the dust, his face went red like a branding iron. He kicked the fence post so hard it shook. Then he spat in the dirt and swore he would drag her home no matter who stood in his way. By the next afternoon, he was already riding toward Ward Ranch. Folks at the general store said they saw him pushing that tired horse like the devil himself was chasing him. In a way, maybe he was. Back at the ranch, May was sitting on the porch wrapped in a blanket. She still looked weak, but her eyes were clearer. She watched the horizon like she expected trouble to walk right out of it. She was right. Elias stepped outside and wiping his hands on a rag, he caught sight of Silas thundering down the dirt road and muttered something under his breath that most ranchers say when fence posts break or storms roll in. Nothing polite. Then Silas slid off his horse and marched straight up the steps. May shrank back, but Elias moved in front of her. Calm but firm, like a man ready to take on a full bull, even if he knew he might get trampled. Silas pointed at May and barked out something about family matters and promises and rightful ownership. Elias did not even blink. He folded his arms, stood solid as a barn wall, and told Silas the truth plain as daylight. May was not property. She was not a wife he could claim, and she sure as hell was not going anywhere with him. Silas got loud then, real loud, enough to scare the chickens behind the barn. But Elias did not raise his voice. He just stepped 1 inch closer, looked Silas square in the eye, and said something that made the whole yard go quiet. "You laid hands on her again, and you will answer to me first and the law second." Silas tried to stare him down, but a man like Elias has the kind of presence that makes others remember their place. After a long moment, Silas backed away, climbed onto his horse, and rode off. But he kept looking over his shoulder. Men like him never leave without a plan. Inside the house, May finally breathed again, but she knew this was not over. And so did Elias. That night, when Elias walked past her chair to grab his coat, she flinched so hard she nearly dropped her cup. He froze, stepped back, and apologized even though he had done nothing wrong. May whispered that she did not mean to react like that. Elias told her healing takes time, and no one rushes her in this house because trouble has a way of returning, especially when it feels humiliated. Before we move to the next part, take a slow sip of your coffee or tea and settle in with me. Tell me what time it is where you are and where you are listening from. And if you like stories told this way, feel free to tap subscribe so you do not miss what happens next. Though Silas left Ward Ranch that afternoon, but everyone could tell from the way he held the reins that he was not done. A man like him does not swallow his pride, he chokes on it. Then he spits it back out at the first person he blames. 2 nights later, the trouble arrived. It came slow at first, just the sound of a horse somewhere out in the dark. Then another one behind it. Elias was on the porch with a lantern, checking the hinges on the screen door. When he heard it, he set the lantern down, listened a moment, then called inside, "Stay close." May peeked from the kitchen and whispered that she felt something mean riding in the wind. She was not wrong. The gate creaked. 2 riders came into view, Silas Turner in front, and behind him, a man who looked like trouble, even in the shadows. Tall, narrow eyes, leather vest worn soft from too many bad nights. Folks called him Jeb Mallory. He was the kind of hired gun who did not talk much, 'cause bullets were his language. They stopped near the barn. Silas shouted that he had come for what was his. Jeb sat silent in the saddle, one hand near his gun, the other tapping his leg like he was already bored. Elias walked down the steps. He did not shout, he did not reach for his gun either. He just stood there with his boots planted and shoulders squared, like the whole ranch rested on his stance. Silas barked that May belonged to him. The whole yard went still. Even the chickens froze like they understood the danger. Elias answered calm and slow, the kind of slow that makes another man rethink his next word. May is free here, and she's staying. That was all it took. Jeb slid off his horse, gun already half drawn. May gasped from inside the doorway. Elias lifted his hand in a quiet warning. Then everything moved fast. Jeb fired first. The shot snapped through the air and grazed Elias across the upper arm, tearing his shirt and drawing blood. Elias staggered for half a second, gripping his arm, but he did not fall. Jeb fired again, but his shot went wild when Silas's horse jerked sideways, kicking up dirt and throwing Jeb off balance. That was the moment Elias steadied himself, aimed low, and sent a bullet into Jeb's shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Jeb fell to one knee and dropped his gun in the dirt. Silas rushed forward, screaming curses. Elias grabbed a rope from the fence, swung it quick, and the loop snapped tight around Silas before he even realized he was caught. Elias yanked hard, and Silas hit the ground face first. Mrs. Grady later said she wished she had clapped, but her hands were shaken too much. By dawn, both men were tied to their saddles, bruised and beaten, while Elias marched them toward Dodge City to face the sheriff. May watched them disappear down the road, her breath unsteady, but her eyes brighter than they had been in years. But here's the part you need to think about now. What happens when a girl who has only known fear finally gets the chance to build a life of her own? And what will she choose once her heart begins to heal? Elias rode back from Dodge City just before noon. The sun was warm, not cruel like the day he first found May. His horse moved slow, almost peaceful, like it knew the danger had finally passed. When he reached the yard, May came out of the house with careful steps, unsure if she should smile or cry, maybe both. Elias slid off the saddle and handed the reins to her. His voice was gentle. "It is done. The sheriff has them. They will not trouble you again." Folks in Dodge City were already whispering that Silas might face the rope come spring, but no one trusted the courts much in those days. And Jeb, well, some said they saw him limping out of the jail 2 nights later, bleeding through his coat and heading south toward Texas. Stories travel fast out here, but truth travels slow. For now, Silas sits in a cell, facing the kind of justice he thought would never touch him. And wherever Jeb ended up limping off to, he will remember this ranch every time his shoulder aches. May held that bridle like it was something holy. For the first time in a long time, her hands did not shake. The days that followed felt different, lighter. The ranch had a calm to it that wrapped around her like a soft quilt. She helped carry water to the barn. She brushed the horses, her fingers running through tangled manes with a kind of quiet purpose. When Elias taught her how to mend a fence, she laughed the first real laugh he had ever heard from her. It was small, but it was alive. Healing is slow. It walks instead of runs, but you could see it in her. Every morning she stood a little straighter. Every evening she spoke a little more. She began to believe she had a place in this world, a place not built on fear, but on her own choices. One afternoon by the river, she told Elias something simple. "I feel safe here." He nodded and said that safety is the first step, not the last. She asked him what the last step was. He smiled in that tired rancher way and said, "Living, really living. The kind of living where you decide who you are, not who someone tried to force you to be." That night, May stood on the porch watching the sun drop behind the cottonwoods. She looked older somehow, not in age, but in strength. The world had taken almost everything from her, yet here she was building herself back piece by piece on a ranch that smelled of hay and warm earth. And maybe that is the lesson tucked inside her story. You can be dragged into the darkest place a person can stand. You can be left alone, hurt, scared, and convinced you will never rise again. But the human heart is stubborn. It reaches for light. Even when it barely remembers what light feels like, it grows back, slow but steady, every time someone shows a little kindness. So let me ask you this. If life ever dragged you through your own rough country, would you have the courage to start again? And if you met someone lost out there in the dust, would you stop like Elias did? Or would you ride on by before you head out? If this story has kept you listening, tap like so more folks can hear it. And if you want more stories told slow and honest like this one, feel free to subscribe so you do not miss the next ride. Now take a breath, sip your coffee, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is over